Has pledged to take the necessary measures to protect its ships. That's after Yemen's Ansarullah group, also known as the Houthis, declared a blockade on Saudi Arabia. They say the embargo will be imposed in the Red Sea, and they say it's in response to what they described as a years-long Saudi blockade of Houthi-controlled areas. The Houthis say the measure will target Saudi shipping through the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which links the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden.
في الخروج المليوني العظيم في جمعة التحذير والنفير.
The Yemeni Armed Forces announces a ban on maritime navigation for the Saudi enemy. According to the rules of a blockade, the siege will be implemented as soon as we have issued this statement. Our people have the right to respond to a blockade with a blockade and escalation with escalation.
Let's bring in Michael Stevens. He's a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. Joins us from the British capital, London. Good to have you with us. So, in addition to the message the Houthis say they want to send to the Saudis about the Saudi blockade, is this step also seen as a message from Iran?
Yes, absolutely it is seen as a message from Iran. And I think, the important thing to note here was the context of an Iranian plane obviously being prevented from landing in Yemen about a week ago. Supposedly the Yemeni government, or the official Yemeni government, was responsible for sort of cratering runways. It looks to me like that was the Saudis, and the Houthis and the Saudis unfortunately have not been able to make their ceasefire hold, and it's gone south pretty quickly, and obviously led to this blockade being announced. But of course it has to be seen within the context of everything that's going on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula and the war that is now restarted in the Gulf between Iran and the US. And it's very clear, to my mind at least, that Iran and the Houthis have some kind of alignment here. Whether it's perfect or not is to be seen. The Houthis do have some autonomy, but it's a pretty big escalation. And if I was in Washington, I'd be a bit worried.
What do you expect?
All right, Shalom, Mr. Brother Kushab, coming back at you another lesson. Now, before I get started, I want to give all praises, glory, infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Hakodash. Nabans to your apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who taught me this truth and rule well. And peace, blessings, and salutation be to the hopefully elect, as well as those that believe in the gospel and may you endure to the end, Lord willing. All right, and as we can see, things are heating up. All right, with the blockade of with Bob L. Salakia, I forget the name, but it's Bob L. something. I'll read it. All right, now as you can see, all right, which why I paused it, all right, I ended it, right, where he said if I was in the U.S. or Washington, I would be worried. All right, now we're gonna get into some statistics, all right, so you can understand why this guy said if I was the U.S. or Washington, I would be worried, right? Because what we have been going on with the whole Strait of Hormuz thing, all right, now you have another situation with the Strait, opposite of it, which is the Strait of Bab el something. I'll read it, but it's a couple points I want to get in here, all right, as I read this a little earlier. It says Saudi Arabia on Monday condemned allegations by Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis that Riyadh was imposing a siege on the Yemeni people after the group announced it would impose a maritime blockade on Saudi Arabia. All right, you should understand that Saudi Arabia, ultimately is an ally of who? The U.S., right? So what you have here going on is these different nations, all right, picking sides, all right, choosing their alliances, man, And a lot of nations are going to not choose the alliance of the U.S., seeing Iran is backed by the Houthis, all right, and we already know who else they backed by, China and Russia, man, So it says aim at the disruption in shipping through the Strait of Hormuz during U.S.-Israel war on Iran. Saudi Arabia was attempting to facilitate offload through alternative routes through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. That's the name of it, all right? Now that route is under threat from the Houthis, in which it's not under threat, it's under blockade, man. So you about to have a war on two fronts, right? And things are increasing, rapidly, showing that at any given time, these things can start turning up more and more. All right. Now I'm gonna jump down a good bit, because if I can't sit here and read the whole article, but it's on aljazeera.com, right? But I want to read through it, but it says in their statement, the Houthis said the declaration of maritime embargo was based on the equation of an eye for an eye and affirmed the right of great people to respond to the blockade with a blockade, and in all escalation with escalation, you see. So people not out here to, bring peace, man. They're not out here to solve problems, all right? Everybody's on, what Jake be saying, demon time, man, all right? An eye for an eye, escalation with escalation, a blockade with a blockade, all right? Mostly, these nations are tired of America and their shit, right? Now, what happened to the so-called JOOs, all right, during this whole thing? In which this whole thing popped off because of them. Where they at? Now you have people actually, and nobody's just catching this, right? It was the U.S. and Israel versus Iran war. Now it's just the U.S. versus Iran. You see, and thus the prophecy is fulfilled, saying, "Surely shall the least of the flock draw them out," man. Now you have Israel just totally backed off and just basically leave the U.S. out there to dry, right? And their job is done, because this thing ain't going nowhere. We only gonna see this war constantly amp up and get worse and worse, man. But it says, we call upon the people of our great nation to continue the general mobilization and general call to arms, and to be fully prepared for all scenarios and developments, and to support the fronts with fighters, the group said. You see? So these people are preparing war, all right? We can start off with that before we get to the second episode, the 14th chapter, all right? This is Joel chapter 3 in verse 9. It says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, and wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near, and let them come up, and beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears, and let the weak say, I am strong. You see? And that's what, we're seeing with the Houthis, all right? With the basically, their alliance to Iran, right? But we understand that with them, ultimately joining in this thing, saying that they are ready for war, they're saying this, all right? What's being said in Joel? Let the weak say I'm strong, right? And he's not a great nation of fighters, man, But they're saying, you know what? Fuck it. Excuse my language, right? Oh, we jumping in this thing, You got a blockade, a fight, a war going on between Iran and the U.S. over the Strait of Hormuz. Well, now you about to have another war going on between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. Like I said, these nations picking their sides, man. Right? All right. Now I'm going to jump down to get to the points. Where was that? All right, I'm gonna get this how it's gonna impact Saudi Arabia. Right, I'm gonna read a little bit in here, then I'll read a little bit in how it's gonna impact the rest of the world. Right, it says the East-West Pipeline, also known as the Petrol Line, is operated by Saudi oil giant Aramco, one of the world's largest companies, with market capitalization exceeding 1.7 trillion and annual revenues of 480 billion. I believe the oil giant controls 12% of the global oil production, with a capacity of more than 12 billion barrels a day. Right, and I'm gonna jump down a little bit. All right, it says total petroleum volumes transiting Bab el Mandab were 7.4 million BPD in June and about 7% of global output according to the Kepler data. That is compared to 4.2 million BPD last year. So how will it affect the rest of the world? Question mark. Now it says in 2024, Saudi Arabia exported 187 billion of crude petroleum, making crude petroleum the country's biggest export, according to the OEC. In that year, China imported 25.6% of this crude petroleum, while South Korea imported 15.8%. Japan imported 15.4%, and India imported 10.5%. Now, we just talking about just oil, all right? Now, you have to understand that America gets most of their things in from where? China, all right? India, even Japan, America gets a lot of their supplies from China, India, and Japan, right? Which is why you had Trump recently, walk back them tariffs on Morocco, because of the lack of I forget what it exactly was, the fertilizer, so this is definitely gonna hit home, all right, because as it's gonna make China, Japan, India, all right, it's gonna make their prices go up, because now it's gonna be harder for them to get what? Their oil, their petroleum, their gas, right? So all of these things have a what's the word I want to use? A negative impact, all right, on the U.S., man, and it's all because, like I said, the least of the flock has drawn them out, man. All right. Now, how was that? Now it says, since China and India are major buyers of Saudi crude, their refiners rely on steady Saudi volumes, all of which comes through the Bab al-Mandab disruptions, mean higher import costs, you see, greater reliance on spot cargoes, and potential pressure on domestic fuel prices and the industry, you see. It says India has also emerged as a key Asian supplier of refined petroleum products to Europe. So any sustained disruption to Saudi flows or Gulf shipping will likely push up the price of oil products exported to European markets, right? Stevens said the blockade will be hugely harmful to the oil economy, which is already fragile, right? It is it's gonna break it down a little more. It says essentially what you're doing is you're shutting off the vast majority of oil supply from one of the world's largest suppliers of crude oil in the world, he said, and that's going to have a very deleterious effects on the oil market. If you're Nero Trump and you want to see oil down at 70 a barrel, that is not going to happen, you see. And over the past week, I've saw the prices go from $3.19 a gallon for 87, regular gas, to now it's like $3.49, $3.59, right? So it says oil prices edged higher on Tuesday with Brent crude futures at $89.70 a barrel, all right? Before the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, Brent crude futures averaged around 70 a barrel. Following the outbreak of the conflict, prices peaked at $126 a barrel. And this is the point. It says it is going to cause inflationary pressure in the Western economies and actually in Asian economies as well, Stevens said. It's going to cause more trouble in terms of depleting oil reserves in economies that have now already been struggling because of this now 5-6 month blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, man. You see? So it's going to cause inflationary pressure, man, here in the West. All right? It's going to impact, it's going to have a negative impact globally. You see? And this was something, I learned of, kind of been looking into it the last, I'd say 4 or 5 days, brother brought out some information, and I forget the exact page, but on it, and I kind of been looking at it, and boom, now this happens, right? So it show you, the money that the U.S. is going to have to use to ultimately buy up and import, get all of their goods and oil and different things like that, and you got to add in the fact of them. I think it was last Wednesday, that they're oil, that they out of oil reserves, man. So this thing is definitely finna turn up here in the U.S., man. All right. As we've been warning you week in, week out that these things were going to happen. All right. They are happening, and it's happening fast. It's happening quick. You see? But let's get some precepts. I had a few that I wanted to grab. All right. This is go back to the second address, 14 in chapter 16. It says, "For yet greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter. For look how much the world shall be weaker through age. So much the more shall all the evils increase upon them that dwell therein." You see? So we're going to see the evils, all right, in the earth increase more and more and more. Okay, why? Because biblical prophecy has to be fulfilled. All right? We only going to be in a soft stage of Jacob's trouble for so long. Things have to increase and get worse, man. Right? Because the Lord, as the scripture said, a worm is spread underneath this place. So everything that's happening globally, on a global scale, that's involving the petrodollar, is all taking a negative hit, man. You see? The Lord is finished with Babylon. He has no use for this place no more. All right? Babylon had been a golden cup, as it says in Jeremiah the 51st chapter. You see? It had been, right? It's no longer that golden cup, man. So these nations don't care to fear Babylon, all right? They don't care to go against Babylon no more, man. You see? Because the Lord has poured that spirit out, so these nations can gear up and get ready for World War III, man. You see? Like the dude said, an escalation for an escalation, a blockade for a blockade, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, man. When has that happened in the history of American alliances, man? Usually these people would have been obliterated, right? Same for Iran. You got them talking crazy to you. It show you that America is not once what it was, But let's go to Revelation, the 6th chapter, all right? Because these couple of verses go in hand, right? So it's Revelation, it's chapter 6, verse 6. It says, "And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. But see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." All right, which that, is going into the hyperinflation, right? When you go into that penny, right? I'm not going to get it because I'm in transit. I'm trying to minimize the reading. I just want to do the lesson while it's hot on my spirit, But when you go into the word penny, it ultimately means, goes into the denarion, right? Which ultimately goes into a day's wages, man. All right. Now, it says a measure of wheat. Excuse me. A measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny, right? So you get a measure of wheat for a penny, which is a day's wages. Okay, a loaf of bread for a day's wages, right? Let's say, I don't know what the average is, but let's say you make $100, $150 a day. All right, that's only gonna be able to get you a loaf of bread, man, in the times that we coming into. You see? And we understand that when it says he hurt not the oil and the wine, that's talking about, the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. All right, those who dwell, all right, with Yahushua, right? When you go verse 7, it says, "And when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death and Hell, and followed, and in power." I'll read it from the top. I'm getting the lines mixed up. It says, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto him over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. All right. And that pale horse is speaking of all the hell, all right, the famine and all the hell that's getting ready to break loose here in America, man. All right. The scriptures tell you that, many, I might have to get it in a second, just quoting it, that those, it's going to be many of those that perish of famine, right? But those that escape will the sword destroy, man, But this is ultimately speaking of here in America, man, all right? When it says over the fourth part of the earth, that's speaking of here in America, man, And like I said earlier, these prophecies, they have to be fulfilled. The Lord he's not playing around no more, right? We've been saying for the past year and a half now, man, it's time for the Lord to work, all right? And we can see that the things that the Lord is doing, he's stirring up the pot, man. He's working, you see? We ain't gonna be teaching much longer, all right? We're not gonna be out here on the highways and hedges much longer, At some point in time, prophecy has to move on, Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, as it says in Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, man. All right? Now, let me get that one. Hunger, sword, destroy. All right? I know that's in the Apocrypha. Yep, 2nd Esdras chapter 16 and verse 22. It says, for many of them that dwell upon the earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the sword, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy, man. So it's telling you that in this period of hyperinflation, right? Because, these people are already in a spirit of, gathering things out of the stores, especially down here in Louisiana, New Orleans, they got a hurricane season. So, people in the store just stacking up on shit, per usual, right? I think they got a little tropical storm on the way. Right, so people was going crazy in the store yesterday, man. All right, so imagine when these things actually hit. When you go to the store and the shelves are actually empty, right? Imagine that. It's not gonna be a sweet, easy thing, a sweet, easy process, bro. That's why I tell you in Lamentations that that people that die by the famine, they pine away stricken for the wants of the fruits of the field. It's better to have ultimately be killed by the modern day sword, right? Which could be a, certain type of gun, whatever, than to actually have your body eat itself out from the inside, man. It's actually better like that. You have a quick or fast death, because a lot of people in the very near future, in these coming months, they're gonna be starving to death, man. Especially you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, right? Because Jake don't have, they say, the average, U.S. household only have about 2 or 3 days worth of food. Jake barely got a day worth, man. So greater evils is coming. These things that's happening, right, across the water, right, is going to start affecting, you Babylonians, man, and it's not going to be pretty either, and it ain't going to be easy, but we understand that the Lord said, hey, my servant shall eat, ye shall be hungry, but my servant shall laugh, man, and we truly and wholeheartedly believe that, all right. But verse 23, it says, and the dead shall be cast out as dung, and there shall be no man to comfort them. For the earth shall be wasted, and the city shall be cast down. There shall be no man left to till the earth and to sow it. The trees shall give fruit, and who shall gather them? The grapes shall ripen, and who shall tread them? For all places shall be desolate of men, so that one man shall desire to see another, and to hear his voice, man. You see? So I'll jump down to 31. It says, even so in those days there shall be 3 or 4 left by them that search their houses with the sword. You see? It's showing you how scarce, it's gonna get. So many people, all right, are getting ready to die here in America, man. We talking about gruesome, all right, grievous debts, as it says in what's that, Jeremiah 16. I'll end it off with that one. This is Jeremiah chapter 16 and verse 4. It says, they shall die of grievous debts. They shall not be lamented, neither shall they be buried, but they shall be as dung upon the face of the earth, and they shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their carcasses shall be meat for the fowls of heaven and for the beasts of the earth. So you're actually gonna have the, what's them vultures, them different birds, like the Lord said in Ezekiel, that he's gonna make a covenant, all right, with the birds, man, and they gonna feast and they gonna feed up, because there's gonna be so many bodies on a, land across the planet Earth. It says they shall be not be buried, all right, but they shall be cast up as dung on the face of the earth, man. And dung is shit. It's gonna be bodies gonna look like stacks of shit, man. When you read in the NLT, it says they will die from terrible diseases. No one will mourn for them or bury them. They will lie scattered on the ground like manure. They will die from war and famine, and their bodies will be food for the vultures and wild animals, man. You see? So that's the times that we entering into during this period of hyperinflation, the period of this system crashing, totally going down. All right, it's about to get nasty out here, man. And we don't have that much longer left. We don't have that much longer left, man. So, that's pretty much the point. All right. So with that, I'm gonna give all praise, glory, infinite honors to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Chakodash, and double honors once again to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, and Shalom Rakim, Shalom.